A man screams. His legs, bound to a 6-ton elephant, dislocate one by one. Every step the beast takes tears another joint from its socket. This will last an hour. Gujarat, 1814. Welcome to hell. What you just heard isn't folklore, it's history. And for over 2,000 years, thousands of people died this way across Asia. This is the story of how empires transformed the most majestic creature on earth into the most terrifying weapon ever conceived. Gujarat, India. The year is 1814. The local chieftain, Amir Sahib, has a problem. An enslaved man has committed an unforgivable crime. He murdered his master. Not just any master, Amir Sahib's own brother. The punishment must match the crime. It must be spectacular. It must be unforgettable. The ground trembles. The assembled crowd falls into hushed silence as the executioner enters the arena. He weighs 6 tons. He stands 11 feet high at the shoulder. He is a bull elephant, and he has been meticulously trained for this moment. Behind the elephant, a man stumbles forward. 3 ropes bind his legs to a metal ring around the elephant's rear right foot. The driver mounted on the beast's back gives a signal. The elephant begins to walk. An eyewitness recorded what happened next, and his account has survived the centuries. Every step the elephant took jerked the prisoner forward. Every 8 or 10 steps must have dislocated another limb, for they were loose and broken when the elephant had proceeded 500 yards. Picture this: a human body dragged through mud and dirt, arms and legs flailing in their sockets like a broken puppet, joints separating, bones grinding, and through it all, the man is still alive, still conscious, still screaming. This grotesque spectacle continues for an hour. Finally, Amir Sahib signals that he's seen enough. The eyewitness describes the finale. The prisoner was taken to the outside of the town when the elephant, which is instructed for such purposes, was backed and put his foot on the head of the criminal. One deliberate step. The skull collapses like an eggshell. This is execution by elephant. But this wasn't an isolated incident. This was a judicial practice that spanned continents and millennia. And what you've just witnessed is actually one of the gentler versions. Ancient execution methods. How elephants became killing machines. The first recorded elephant executions happened in the Middle East in the 4th century BC. But these weren't the calculated theatrical punishments we'll discuss later. These were acts of military brutality, pure and simple. Babylon, 323 BC. Alexander the Great has just died, and his Macedonian troops mutiny. The region of Macedon decides to make an example of the rebels. He selects 300 mutineers and, as the Roman chronicler Quintus Curtius Rufus records, before the eyes of the entire army, he threw them to the elephants. All were trampled to death beneath the feet of the beasts. No ceremony, no ritual, just mass execution. The ground shaking as dozens of elephants stampede over screaming men, bones snapping, bodies crushed into the earth. The message is clear. This is what happens to those who rebel. A century later, the Carthaginian general Hamilcar Barca uses the same method. After 700 of his own prisoners are tortured to death by enemies, he retaliates by having his war elephants trample enemy captives. Revenge served by the ton. But these are crude applications of raw power. The commanders witnessed elephants in the wild, saw their capacity for destruction, and weaponized it. There's no artistry here, no refinement, just overwhelming force applied to helpless victims. Everything changes when the practice moves east into South and Southeast Asia. Here, elephant executions evolve into something far more sophisticated. They become enshrined in law, codified, ritualized, perfected. The Manu Smriti, the ancient Indian legal code emerging around 200 BC, lists elephant execution as a prescribed punishment for various crimes. Not just murder or treason, theft, tax evasion, crimes we consider relatively minor today, could result in being crushed beneath an elephant's foot. Why did this method become so prevalent in these regions? Simple geography. Elephants were abundant. Asian communities lived and worked alongside these creatures for centuries. They understood their power, they respected it, and they learned to harness it. By the medieval period, execution by elephant was common practice, from India to Vietnam, from the Mughal courts to the jungles of Siam. Different regions developed their own variations, their own techniques, but three core principles remained constant across all these executions. Three intentions that transformed a simple killing into an art form of cruelty. Why elephants were used for execution. Intention 1. Death. How elephants killed prisoners slowly. This seems obvious. The elephant kills the prisoner. But how it kills them is what matters. An elephant stepping on your head or chest? Death is instantaneous. Merciful even. The 7-ton weight obliterates bone and organ in a fraction of a second. You wouldn't feel a thing. But merciful wasn't on the agenda. In southern Vietnam, prisoners were tied to stakes. The elephant wouldn't simply crush them. Instead, it would charge. Again, and again, and again. Each impact breaking ribs, rupturing organs, but carefully calibrated to keep the victim alive. Death came slowly, after multiple charges, after unimaginable suffering. The authorities controlled the pace of death. They could make it last minutes or hours. The elephant became a precision instrument of graduated lethality. Intention 2. Shame. The humiliating death by elephant execution. Captain Alexander Hamilton, a European traveler, wrote about the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan ordering enemies taken to the elephant garden for execution, calling it a shameful and terrible death. Shame. Not just death, but degradation. Think about it. A warrior might die with honor on the battlefield, sword in hand. A criminal might face the executioner's blade standing tall, meeting their fate with dignity. But being crushed by an animal? Tossed through the air like a toy? Rolled in the dirt like garbage? There's no dignity in that death. Records from Siam describe elephants trained to toss victims into the air before killing them. Imagine the humiliation, the utter helplessness. Your body ragdolling through the air while crowds watch. You're not a person anymore. You're entertainment. You're less than human. This wasn't just execution. It was erasure of dignity, destruction of honor, obliteration of any final shred of respect. You died as you were crushed, beneath an animal, covered in filth, with your last moments spent flying through the air like a broken doll. Intention 3. Entertainment. Public executions as spectacle in ancient India. 1305 AD. The Mongols have just failed to invade the Delhi Sultanate. The Sultan captures hundreds of Mongolian warriors. He doesn't execute them in private. He drags them to a public arena. The crowd roars. This is a festival, a celebration, and the elephants are the main attraction. A few decades later, the famous Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta visits the Delhi Sultanate. He witnesses an elephant execution following an assassination attempt on the vizier. His description is chilling. The prisoners were thrown to the elephants, which had been taught to cut their victims to pieces. Their hooves were cased with sharp iron instruments, and the extremities of these were like knives. Battuta describes elephants that obey their drivers with perfect precision. The driver gives a command. The elephant wraps its trunk around a prisoner and tosses them into the air. The victim crashes to the ground. The elephant catches them with its tusks, throws them between its forefeet. The crowd watches, fascinated by this brutal choreography. The elephants would do just as the driver should bid them, Battuta continues, and according to the orders of the emperor. If the order was to cut the prisoner to pieces, the elephant would do so with his irons, and then throw the pieces among the assembled multitude. The elephant doesn't just kill, it performs. It follows directions like an actor on stage. The crowd gets their money's worth. Bits of the victims scattered into the audience like confetti. But if the emperor orders mercy, the elephant stops, leaves the prisoner lying there, alive but mutilated, until their skin is removed, stuffed with hay, and their flesh fed to dogs. This is entertainment. This is pageantry. This is what happens when execution becomes theater. The Mughal Emperor Jahangir was reportedly so amused by these executions that he regularly attended them. The French traveler François Bernier, writing in the 17th century, describes his shock at the pleasure Jahangir took from watching the process. The emperor smiled, he laughed, he clapped. Death, shame, and entertainment. These three intentions defined elephant executions across South and Southeast Asia for nearly 2 millennia. But we haven't reached the worst part yet. Elephant torture techniques, the most brutal execution method in history. Remember Gujarat 1814? That hour-long dragging? That was just one technique. What made elephant executions truly horrifying wasn't the killing itself. It was the restraint, the control, the deliberate prolonging of agony. Think about it. You have a 6-ton animal that could end a life in 1 second. One step on the skull, and it's over. But across dozens of documented cases, authorities chose not to use this power. Instead, they trained elephants to torture. Let's travel south to the Kingdom of Kandy in Sri Lanka, early 19th century. British traveler James Emerson Tennant speaks with a Kandyan chief who explains their method with disturbing pride. The elephant doesn't use its tusks or feet for a quick kill. Instead, it tortures the victim slowly with its trunk. The elephant, the chief explains, placed his foot on the prostrate victim and plucked off his limbs in succession by a sudden movement of his trunk. Wait, plucked off limbs? With the trunk? This sounds impossible. It takes enormous force to tear a human limb from its socket. Even elephants, capable of incredible strength, would need to sever joints first, right? Wrong. 2 pieces of evidence confirm this actually happened exactly as described. First, an illustration from 1681 appears in Robert Knox's book, An Historical Relation of the Island of Ceylon. The engraving is labeled, An Execution by Elephant. It shows precisely what the Kandyan chief described 150 years before Tennant's visit. The elephant, 1 foot on a body, trunk wrapped around an arm, pulling. But here's the truly disturbing proof. British diplomat Henry Charles Sir visits Kandy. By this time, the British have banned elephant executions for 35 years. But because elephants can live 60 to 70 years, some of the executioner elephants are still alive. Sir requests to see one. The Kandyan authorities agree. They bring out an elephant, mottled hide, enormous size, but appearing quite docile. The keeper sits on its neck, the animal completely obedient to his commands. Then the Kandyan nobleman gives an order. The keeper dismounts. Now the real performance begins. The nobleman speaks the command, "Slay the wretch." What happens next, Sir describes in meticulous detail. The elephant raises its trunk and twines it as if around a human being. It makes motions of depositing the imaginary victim on the ground. Then, slowly, methodically, it raises its rear foot and places it alternatively on spots where the limbs of a suffering person would be. Sir watches, fascinated and horrified, as the elephant performs a shadow execution. The creature works with deliberate care, taking several minutes to systematically shatter the arms and legs of its invisible victim. Each movement precise, each placement of the foot calculated. This isn't random violence. This is a choreographed execution burned into the animal's memory decades ago. Finally, the elephant raises its trunk high above its head and stands motionless, waiting. The nobleman gives the final command. The elephant places 1 foot where a man's abdomen would be, the other where his head would be, and presses down with its full weight. The execution is complete, and the elephant hasn't forgotten a single step. 35 years later, the muscle memory remains perfect. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine what this means. Imagine being that prisoner in 1815. You're brought before an elephant. It wraps its trunk around your arm. You feel the impossible strength as it pulls. Your shoulder socket separates. The tendons tear. Your arm comes free from your body, but you're still alive, still conscious. And the elephant moves to your next limb. This is the perfection of cruelty. This is what happens when humans train the most intelligent land animal on Earth to become a torture machine. When did elephant executions end? The dark legacy of animal torture. When did this practice finally end? The British colonial authorities banned elephant executions in India in 1815. Other regions followed suit as European powers expanded their control across Asia. By 1900, the practice had essentially disappeared, but the echoes remain. Between the 4th century BC and the mid-19th century AD, that's over 2,000 years of this practice. Tens of thousands of people died this way. Maybe more. We'll never know the true number because for the people living in these regions, this wasn't extraordinary. This was just how justice worked. It was so common, so routine, that most executions were never recorded. Today, approximately 50,000 Asian elephants live in the wild. Their habitats have been devastated over the last century, and conservation efforts struggle to protect what remains. None of these elephants are trained to kill. None of them remember the commands their ancestors knew. But humans remember. We remember because travelers wrote about it, because they were shocked, because to European eyes, this practice was exotic, horrifying, fascinating. So they recorded every detail, and those records survived. The practice itself reveals something profound about human nature. It's not enough to simply kill enemies or criminals. We need them to suffer. We need them to be humiliated. And we need an audience to witness it. We turn the most majestic land animal on Earth into an instrument of calculated cruelty. We trained creatures capable of emotion, memory, and intelligence to become perfect torture machines. And they learned. They remembered. They performed. Execution by elephant wasn't just a punishment. It was a statement. It said, we control nature itself. We bend the powerful to our will. And if we can make an elephant obey our cruelest commands, imagine what we can do to you. For 2 millennia, these animals stood as living symbols of authority, power, and the horrifying creativity of human cruelty. They were called many things in different languages, but in some regions they were known as Gunga Rao, the silent executioners. Silent, because elephants don't speak, but their actions spoke volumes about the empires that commanded them and the prisoners who died beneath their feet. Today, those elephants are gone, but the lesson they taught us remains. There is no limit to human cruelty when power goes unchecked, and there is no creature we won't corrupt to serve our darkest purposes.